G'day, Mr. Bill here, and welcome to my mini-series on the Ableton devices. Essentially what I'm going to be doing here is going through absolutely every device in Ableton and basically explaining what they all do, going through a bit of sound theory, things like that. And I'm basically going to break it up into parts. For instance, today we're going to go through filters, which are EQs basically. So I'll just go to my master channel here and I'll just chuck on a bunch of EQs, all the ones that Ableton offer. So first of all, they offer the auto filter, and then they offer EQ8 and EQ3. And essentially they all do the same thing, but they have slightly different functions. And I'll go into those now for you. So I'll just turn them all off to begin with, and we'll just turn them on as we need them. So if you double click up here on a device, it'll just shut it for you to make it a little bit more easily to pack up and navigate around this device section down the bottom here. So I'll just double click on EQ8 now, and we'll start with this one. Actually no, we'll start with EQ3 because it's simple. Alright, so this is EQ3. Before I start with EQs, I'm just going to assume that you don't know what an EQ is, so I'm just going to go into sort of the idea of what it is. So essentially what an EQ is, it's easy to explain with EQ8 because of the way it's plotted on a graph. And basically, I guess the best way to explain it is it's a frequency versus amplifier graph. So from left to right you have your frequencies, from the low frequencies to the high frequencies, and up and down you have amplitude, which is measured in decibels. So left to right is measured in hertz, and bottom to top is measured in decibels. Essentially it's a frequency dependent volume control. So say I was to grab 500 hertz here and push it up. Essentially what I'm doing there is I'm pushing 500 hertz up 4 dB, because you can see the gain here and the frequency here, and you can move these parameters from over here, or you can just simply grab the points here and just move them around. So what's happening when I'm pushing 500 hertz by 4 dB is I'm not actually pushing only 500 hertz, I'm pushing all of the frequencies around it as well, down to about 100 hertz and up to about 2 kilohertz almost. And we can change that with what's called a quality factor, or otherwise labeled Q, or some people in the audio filter they call it resonance. Oh, well, it's actually called Q there as well, but sometimes you might see it called resonance. So if you mess with the Q value, hold up, I'll just go back to this point here. See down the left hand side of the device you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way up until 8, and you can just click on these and add more poles, but at the moment we don't need that, we only need one pole. So I'll get rid of them all by pressing this little square here to turn them on or off, and then click on the tabs next to them with the numbers to get to the one that you want to use. So here we are, I'll type 500 into that box, and whoops, that's 5,500 and 4 dB. So if we don't want to push all the frequencies around this, we can mess with this Q value, and it either makes it steeper or wider. And this is when I push it all the way up and we see this big narrow Q, that's what's known as upward EQing. But when I bring the gain down a bit and turn the Q down, that's called sideways EQing. And essentially the difference here is you'll introduce less artifacts with sideways EQ, and it just sounds slightly better typically. Alright, so we'll start with EQ3. Essentially this is just like EQ8, except you don't really have a frequency. You have a frequency point for the lows and the highs, but you can't really tell the mids where to go. You kind of have to decide that by where you put the lows and the highs. And then these are just amplifier controls for those frequencies. So for instance, if I put frequency low on 200 hertz and then we play that, and then I turn gain low down 6 decibels, essentially everything below 200 hertz is going to be 6 decibels quieter. So we'll just listen to that. So what I've done just there is I've taken 14 decibels out of 200 hertz, and you can hear that it immediately sounds thinner it doesn't sound fat anymore. It sounds weak. And you can do this with the highs as well. You can take all the highs out, and if I move that to 3000, basically everything above 3000 hertz or 3 kilohertz, I'm cutting by 14 dB, and this will probably sound like a telephone now. Kind of. Maybe if I turn them down a bit more. Yeah, that sounds pretty much like a telephone. So yeah, that's basically EQ3. I don't really like it. I think it's almost useless. It doesn't take up as much power as EQ8, although it doesn't have much control to it at all, so I usually don't really use it. I usually either use EQ8 or auto filter depending on what I'm doing. So I guess the next thing we have to look at is why are some of the reasons that you EQ. Some of the reasons you might do it is to separate frequencies, or cut out noise, or change the tone or timbre of an instrument. So if we go to the snare drum, for instance, and we listen to that, I'll just turn it off on the master. So we've dropped the EQ on the snare drum. Well, this is actually an EQ I already had on there. I'll just drop another EQ after it. So say we want less bottom end in there, we can go down and change the points on the EQ to this one here is called a high pass, the one at the other end is called a low pass. And essentially what the low pass does is it does exactly what you would think, I guess. It lets all the low frequencies past, and the high pass does the exact opposite. It lets all the high frequencies past. So if we were to choose a high frequency or high pass filter and then bring up the frequency and then we listen to the snare, there's no bottom end in it anymore. It sounds thin. But as we bring that down, it starts to sound like it has more body again, because that's where all the fatness of the snare lays. So that's one thing you could do with it, I guess. We'll go to the hi-hats. I usually like to cut everything about under 1000 hertz at least on the hi-hats, and the reason for that is just simply because you really don't want anything in a hi-hat that's under 2000 hertz. There's nothing there that is of interest to your mix, basically. So if we listen to it without the EQs, we'll just turn all these off. Actually, I'll just make a key mapping for that. I'll just press key up here in the top right hand corner, and I'll just click on the on off button, and I'll just press the number 1, and then I'll go to the next one, press the number 1, go to the last one, press the number 1. So there we have an on and off button now for all those EQs. Just press the number 1, it'll turn them on and off, and we'll listen to the difference of all these 3 channels here: closed hats, open hats, and cymbal. First we'll listen to them with EQ, and then I'll turn the EQ off and we'll listen again. So this is without all the frequencies in the cymbals being passed by 1.6 kilohertz. Sorry, that's with it. I'll turn it off. So just concentrate on the cymbal sound there, and we'll just listen to the cymbals. Try to listen to the cymbals and nothing else, and at the same time try and listen to them in the mix, and then we'll turn the EQs on and we'll see how it sounds. So we'll just listen to that again. So now we'll listen to them again, but we'll turn the EQs on, and we'll see what that does to the sounds within the mix. So I'll just press the number 1, and that'll turn all my EQs for them 3 channels back on again, because I set the key mapping for it, and we'll see what that does to it in the mix. So that sounds immediately brighter to me. So we'll just listen to them again. Press the number 1, listen. Now listen with, without, with. To me it just sounds a lot cleaner and a lot brighter. If you're on studio monitors, you'll hear that straight away. And yeah, basically it's just, I don't know, a nice way of going through all your channels and cleaning it up like that. It's just, it'll tighten your mixes up so much just to go around and clean up all the frequencies that you don't need. So, so far we've covered pass filters. Another type of filter down the bottom here, we've covered the this one on each end, so now we'll move into the next ones, which are called shelving filters. And these were invented by Peter Baxandall in the late 1940s. You can look up what's called the Baxandall curve. And essentially what these ones do is the frequency now becomes a selector for a center frequency, and then the gain cuts. Sorry, that's on a bell. Turn it to shelf. So the frequency now, instead of choosing where to cut, it kind of, say I have it at 500 hertz, I'll just turn off all the other ones that I'm not using to make it easy. So I have this one at 500 hertz, and that becomes a center frequency. It kind of splits the EQ up into two sections. And then if I start cutting with the gain, it cuts everything or boosts everything below that certain point at a constant amount, and then I can mess with my Q or resonance value to sort of play with the cutoff point frequency. So if I turn the Q right up, you'll see it gets nice and sharp around that cutoff point, and the less I turn it down, the smoother it is, which is probably better. That's what we want. So if we listen to that, that's on the master now. Everything below 500 hertz should be 6 dB louder. And then if we cut that by 6 dB, I'll just click in this gain, -6. So now everything below 500 hertz should be 6 dB quieter. So yeah, it's a pretty cool little thing you can do. Probably wouldn't do it on the master in general. Typically I'll do something like that maybe on cymbals as well, or possibly maybe on the master for a little bit if you wanted to go into a bit of a break, say like have it, we'll play it from here, and then through this 4 bars we'll drop it into everything below 555 hertz -6 dB. We'll see how that sounds as like a little break thing. So that can add to sort of a bit of punch on your drop when it comes back in. Can sort of just act as that's more of a purely creative thing to do with an EQ rather than something that will fix issues. So the only other 2 filter types we have to talk about now is a bell curve and a notch filter. So a bell curve is basically the frequency point now becomes a point in which you can cut or boost certain frequencies, like where we started. So if you turn the Q value down, you'll see it starts to get a bigger bandwidth. A bandwidth refers to sort of the amount of hertz that we're dealing with. And if we turn the Q up, or the resonance, it creates a narrower point. And that's kind of good if you want to deal with single frequencies. Say in my mix I don't like 500 hertz, and I cut 500 hertz by 15 dB, we'll say, and then we'll listen to the difference there. Basically everything below 500 hertz, or sorry, everything in that 500 hertz bandwidth just around here will be getting cut. So we'll listen to it without, and then I'll turn it on. So that's without it. I'll turn it on now. So essentially it sounds like it has no mids now. It sounds not punchy in the middle. Kind of sounds like it's underwater a little bit, I reckon. So if we turn the gain up and then we move the Q value out so it's got a wide bandwidth, now it should sound like it's got plenty of mids, because essentially what we're doing is we're taking everything from around 90 hertz and up to about 3K. We're boosting all of that, although the stuff that's around, say, 100 hertz to 200 hertz isn't being boosted quite as much as at 500 hertz, and likewise up until 3K, back until about 1K. So we'll just listen to what that sounds like. So immediately after you've boosted that, the snare just jumps right out. So we'll turn that off. Yeah, so the snare becomes punchier, the hi-hats become a little bit more pronounced, the bass becomes more pronounced. Basically everything that sits in the mid-range is just jumping out now, and that's, I don't like that either, but there's something else you can do if you like. So now the last one to look at is this middle one. We'll call this is called a notch filter, and essentially all it does is it cuts, and that's it. You can turn the Q right up, and it'll be a narrow cut, or you can turn it down and it'll be a wider cut, and then you can move your frequency pointer around telling it where to cut. That's all it does. It just cuts a notch out of it, otherwise known as a rejection filter sometimes. It basically just rejects the frequency that you tell it to at however much bandwidth you tell it to. So if we listen to that, what we're doing is just cutting 244 hertz. Well, we're not actually just cutting 244 hertz, we're cutting everything from 144 hertz all the way up until 500 or so. So I'll just slide this notch filter around, we'll see how that sounds. I'll turn the Q value right up and you probably won't notice it that much. But as I turn the Q value down, you start to notice it more because it cuts more frequencies out. So yeah, that's the last type of filter shape that we can look at. Another thing that we can look at on the EQ is the mode. There's left right, which basically means you're EQing your left and your right speakers slightly differently. And then there's another weird one called MS, which is mid-side. So if we click on the edit button next to the mode, it goes between left and right, or mid and side if we have them options. If we have the mode on stereo, which is what it opens in default, it essentially just means you're EQing both your speakers the exact same, but sometimes you don't want that. Sometimes you want to keep stuff in one speaker, leave it in the other speaker and get rid of it in one speaker, or then come to a point in your track and switch them options around and do things like that. So so here what we're doing is in the right speaker we're cutting 1.8 kilohertz by 15 dB, and in the left speaker we're cutting 725 hertz by, we don't really know how many dB, I guess it's over 15, seems it's going down further than this one, and this is 15 dB, but it's just cutting it as much as it can. So we'll hear how that sounds. It should sound different in both speakers. So you can hear slightly more mids in the right speaker because we haven't cut it around where the mids are, we've cut it more where the highs are starting to get introduced. Then after that we have the mid-side mode, and that's kind of weird. Essentially it refers to the stereo placement of the sound, I guess, and it's sort of cutting around the center image, I guess, would be the mid, and the side would kind of be the outskirts of your speakers, if that makes any sense. It's weird to explain, so I won't go into that too much, but maybe it's something to look into. And then the scale, I guess, is I'm not exactly sure what scale does. Okay, I guess it's how easily you can. I think it's just a viewing option. Yeah, it's not changing the effect at all, so I guess it's just a viewing option if you want to see your curves more pronounced or whatever. So we'll go to stereo, turn on 1, go to 500 Hertz. Again, because that's the one we've been using, go to bell curve, turn it up by 15 dB, and yeah, it doesn't even look like it's turned up at all. Whereas if we turn the scale up to 100 where it should be, it gets turned up heaps. If we turn it up to 200, it gets turned up even more. Although it's not actually turning it up anymore, it's just looks like it's turned up more because it's a viewing option to see them easier. Why you'd want to do that, I'm not exactly sure. I never used that function. And then the final function we can talk about on EQ8 is the gain down here in the bottom right hand corner, and essentially that's just to make your gain the same as when you cut or boost it or whatever, so it's not louder, so you can compare properly, or so you can get rid of clips after you've done what you want. So say we boost 684 Hertz by 15 dB, this is going to sound like shit. So we listen to that and then we turn it off, and this one's much louder, so we can turn that down on the final gain to sort of match it up to compare it properly. Needs to be a little bit louder. Yeah, so that's pretty close, but yeah, essentially this output gain is just gain, and that's it. So in theory we could have no EQ happening at all and just turn the gain up 12 dB. Oh, that's loud. So we'll just turn it up 6 dB. Yep, that's pretty loud. So yeah, it can kind of just act as that as well, although you can use utility for that. So we'll get rid of this now and we'll look at the auto filter. So basically auto filter, it's the same kind of thing, although you have a couple of less filter options. You don't really have the bell function, but you also don't really have a shelving function. But it's just another EQ. That's all it is. Although on this one you have this little arrow here, and we can open that, and you have a side chaining function. And I guess before I explain that, I should explain the LFO. So what an LFO is it's a low frequency oscillator, which means it's meshing or combining the automation or modulation with a really low frequency that we can't hear, that moves up and down at a rate that you define with this control here, and it tells whatever you've applied the LFO to, which in this case applies to the frequency, to move in a certain way. So if we turn the bandpass onto 1.4, we turn the amount of the LFO up and we play with the rate, you should hear it going between, I don't know, like 300 Hertz and 7K maybe. So yeah, that's pretty cool. You can do it with any kind of filter. It's used in dubstep a lot with a low pass filter that just has a really high amount of LFO with a lot of rate, and usually has a bit of resonance on the filter. Of course, in dubstep they don't apply it to their whole mix, or they might sometimes, but generally no, it's just on the bass. So you have the rate, next to it you have this Hertz sign, and below it you have a little musical note looking thing. So essentially what we can do is we can measure the rate in hertz, or we can measure it in musical values like 16th notes, 12th notes, 8th notes, etc. So if we put it on 16th notes and we put the click on, that should be in time with the click. The click should be going click, 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 and on top of that the LFO should be going wobble, 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 because that's 16th notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or crotchets. And then if we turn this rate down, 12th, so that's in triplets. Now it's going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then 8th notes, 6th. So yeah, there's a bunch of different stuff you can do with that. You can turn the amount down, and it won't jump as high and low as it does if we have it turned up. I'll just turn it up so you can hear what that sounds like. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So if you don't want the LFO, there's no on and off button for the LFO, it's just an amount. So if you don't want it to affect anything, just turn the amount down to 0. If you want it to affect, just start turning it up. And then you have a bunch of different shapes. You have a square, sine, triangle, saw, or ramp. You have sort of two different ramp saw waves. I think this one's kind of a version of noise maybe, and so is this one, so we'll listen to that. Alright, so this one introduces panning and this one doesn't, but they're essentially both noise, I believe, which noise waves are really, really crazy. They're always random. They don't really have any sort of control to them like a sine wave or a square wave or something does. So yeah, they're probably the craziest ones. You might want to usually stick to these ones if you're trying to create conventional music. So we'll try the square wave, and that should just sound like the rate is switching between 16ths. It should just be really, really tight. So yeah, it's more stabby and staccato than the sine wave. It doesn't flow as smoothly through. It just sort of turns on and off. And then phase and offset, I guess, is relating to that low frequency that it's meshing with. I think the offset relates to where it starts in the wave as to how it moves with the music. Well, that actually sounds to me like it's offsetting both speakers. So the left speaker and the right speaker is sounding slightly different. Actually, that's the phase doing that. No, I was right, the offset is defining the point in where it starts in the wave, and the phase is kind of changing what's happening in both speakers. So at 180 degrees they should be doing completely opposite things. Which is, yeah, what it sounds like to me. It sounds like it's spinning around in my head because it's doing completely different things in both speakers. So if we have it at 0 or 360, it'll be doing the same thing in both speakers. Which again is probably what you want with conventional music, but you could go through and automate that to go right through those points. So what else we have here? So finally we have a sidechain function. So I can turn this sidechain on, and we haven't gone through compressors yet, but the compressor also uses this. We can take an audio from an input, so we'll take the input from the kick and then we'll turn the envelope up, and essentially what this does is it's kind of like an LFO, except it takes its trigger not from a really low oscillator but from an audio input that we define here. So I've defined it to take the input from nice kick, and then I've turned the amount up, which is this one here, and then every time the kick hits we should hear it jump up like this and then come back down. So we should hear what sounds like an LFO to open and shut. So we can hear every time the kick comes in, the filter's opening and then closing again. So the only other options we have for this is the dry wet, how much does it, how much gain this kick is bringing into it, which means it'll do it harder. So if I turn the gain right up, it should open the filter right up. So you can hear it lets all the highs through heaps more when I turn that gain up. So I'll turn that back to 0, turn the dry wet up, turn the amount up, and then the other options is attack and release. And essentially all that does is it tells it how long after the kick comes in to open it and how long after the kick finishes to shut it, or how long after it opens to shut again. So if I turn the attack down to 0.1 milliseconds, it means it pretty much opens straight away. Where it was 6 milliseconds, it means after 6 milliseconds, which we can't really define because we're not quick enough. So at 6 milliseconds, after that it will open and then shut again. And yeah, kind of, so if I have it at 30 milliseconds, the kick should play, and then 30 milliseconds later the filter will open. So you can kind of hear it has like a nice slope into it now. And then if I turn this filter up to 400 milliseconds, it should take a lot longer to shut as well, or to come back down in the frequencies. Or if I set both of these right down, they should just open and shut really quickly. So yeah, that's basically all the options of the auto filter. Then you have a quantized beat, which is kind of like the rate on the LFO. So yeah, that's basically all the filter options that you have in Ableton. Next we'll be covering dynamics processes such as compressors, limiters, utility, things like that. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this and got something out of it. And yeah, cheers, take it easy.